בית, כל אחד רוצה בית. זה הבית היחידי בארץ שיש תרבות להתמקד שמרכז חדר משפחה גדול, אתר אינטרנט וספרייה. ספרייה בנויה על בסיס של עזבונות ניצולים ומשמשת בעיקרון של התרבות והקהילה. אתר וילנה ספרייה מספק פלטפורמה להנגשת עדויות הניצולים.
ב-1946 אחרי מלחמת העולם השנייה בארץ ישראל קם איגוד יוצאי וילנה והסביבה. בדיוק אחרי 15 שנים נשיא זמר שזר אסף 30 יהודים יוצאי וילנה שבאו מכל העולם. בישיבה הזאת התקבלה החלטה להקים בית וילנה והסביבה.
זה היה בית של אמא שלי וכל החברים שלה. בשבילה זה היה הסליל האב היחיד של הילדות שלה. כל אחד מאלה שהיו כאן היו סחליפי אח, אחות, אמא, אבא, ילדות.
אני שר, אני חי. המקום הזה ישר, ויש לי זכות גדולה שאני גם שר פה.
המסע לווילנה הייתה משמעות מאוד גדולה עבורי. סבא שלי היה מאוד פעיל בבית וילנה, ואני העברתי פעילות בדור הרביעי, ואני אמשיך לספר את סיפור פעילת וילנה.
מה שמאפיין את הוילנאים זה שהם אנשים מאוד תוססים, אנשים שמחים, אוהבי תרבות, למדנים, סקרנים ושואבים. אני תמיד הייתי שובבה, חברותית, צמיחה. היום אני כבר יודעת לזהות את זה לווילנאיות. זאת הבת שלי דרך אגב.
וזהו נושא צילם עוד לפני שלי חזר להיות עולם וילנה. אבא גר ממול יום וילנה, ויש צילומים שלהם,
זאת מורשת תרבות שהיא היסוד לתרבות העכשווית. עליה נבנה הכל.
אבא יהודי מסתכל על העתיד, תמיד הולך קדימה, אבל עיניים שלישית דרכו. כל הישיבות שיש היום בארץ, כל תנועת המוסר התחילה בליטא. עם תרבות כזאת עשירה שיש לנו, אנחנו צריכים ללמוד ממה שהיה קודם, אבל ללכת קדימה.
עשינו מסע ברחבי ליטא, הייתה שם משלחת רשמית שהגענו לליטא. בשנה אחרי זה כבר הזמינו אותנו לקבלת לנו בפרלמנט. אנחנו מארחים פה בבית וילנה משלחות רשמיות שמגיעות מליטא. אנחנו מארחים תלמידי תיכון, מכירים פה אנשים מהדור השני שהוריהם הגיעו מאותן עיירות וערים שהם עצמם הגיעו, והם מביאים את הסיפורים שהם שמעו שם. אימצנו יחידת חיל הים.
החיבור הזה, האימוץ ההדדי הזה נותן את הקשר האישי. וכשאתה לוקח סיפור של קהילה, של עיר, כמו וילנה, עם המורשת והסיפורים, אז הרבה יותר קל להכיל, להבין ולהתחבר לזה.
הבנו מה אנחנו נותנים להם, את המשמעות של בשביל מה, למה. אנחנו פונים לציבור הרחב להפקיד בידינו את הסיפורים של הניצולים והנספים, ובצורה כזאת להנציח אותם לעד. הרבה אנשים מתעוררים פתאום אומרים, מאיפה אני בא? מה העבר שלי? למה אני לא יודע?
אני רואה העיקר, תפקידי זה איך מורישים את זיכרון התרבות העשירה לדור הבא.
אני חושב שזה יהיה מרכז תרבות לא רק של אלה שהם וילנאים או ליטאים, אלא שזאת תהיה המורשת ששייכת לעם יהודי בכלל.
מקום לשנה, מרגישים את דפיקות הלב כל תעבור, מקום לבוא אליו. טוב, אתי מזכירה לי פעם שלישית היום לבקש מכולם לסגור טלפונים ובבקשה לא להסתובב במשך השעה וחצי, שעתיים שיש לנו כדי להישאר מרוכזים ולמצות כל דקה מהיום הזה שמצפה לנו. אז תודה על ההתחשבות. מי שלא מכיר אותי, שמי מיקי קנטור ואני יושבת ראש איגוד יוצאי וילנה והסביבה, ואני רוצה לברך פה את כל הנוכחים. אנחנו נתכנסנו כאן, רגע, סליחה. קודם כל, כמו שכבר רשמתי, חנה. שלום לכל האורחים הרבים שהגיעו היום לבית וילנה והסביבה, בית להנצחה ולמורשת ליטבקים, כמו שראיתם בסרטון התדמית הזה שהשקענו בו את התמצית שלנו, את הליבה. אני מתכוונת לפתוח את האירוע המרכזי של איגוד יוצאי וילנה והסביבה בישראל, יום הזיכרון הבינלאומי 2023, שמתקיים בבית וילנה בתל אביב זה 15 שנה ברציפות. למי שלא זוכר, ההחלטה על קיום יום הזיכרון הבינלאומי לציון רצח היהודים בניסיון ליישם את הפתרון הסופי לשאלה היהודית התקבלה בכנסת פה אחד, ולראשונה הוא צוין ב-2006. בראש ובראשונה אני רוצה לברך ולהודות לך דוקטור דיקמן שנענית לפנייתנו להגיע במיוחד מפרנקפורט לביתנו הצנוע שבתל אביב בתאריך כל כך משמעותי בתולדות עם ישראל בעת החדשה, וזה ממש לא עניין של מה בכך. אני מבקשת להביע הערכה מיוחדת לכל מי שהביא את כולנו הנאספים כאן בבית ברגע הזה בו כולנו יושבים כאן מכונסים, שותפתנו גברת לינה אנטנביציינה, שגרירת ליטא בישראל וצוותה הנאמן, המלווים אותנו כבר כעשור וחצי אנחנו בקשר עם שגרירות ליטא ומקיימים פעילויות תרבות ביחד כדי להכיר ולקרב את הלבבות למרות כל מה שהיה. אני רוצה להודות לרב סרן אלעד הנר, מפקד יחידת הנדסה כלי שיט וחיילי חיל הים שאנחנו מאומצים הדדית מזה 11 שנה. ובהזדמנות זו אני רוצה לציין שיום הזיכרון הבינלאומי נופל יומיים אחרי המועד 25 לינואר 1968 בו טבעה, נעלמה הצוללת אחי דקר על 69 אנשי צוותה כשהייתה בדרכה מבריטניה לישראל. ביום הזה אנחנו תמיד מזכירים אותם ונזכור אותם לעד. למי שמעוניין יש פה ארון הנצחה שחיל הים קבע פה אצלנו, אתם איתנו תמיד בלב. בינואר 2012 הוענקה תעודת האימוץ הראשונה בין שתי היחידות על ידי מיכאל שמיאביץ, היה היושב ראש הקודם, ו7 שנים ב-2016 הוזמנו לבסיס חיל הים בנמל חיפה לקבל את הצוללת הגרעינית רב, וזה אפס קצהו של הקשר בין שני הארגונים. אני רוצה להודות ליערית שטרחה ליצור את הקשר עם דוקטור דיקמן ולבנות את האירוע הזה בעמל רב, לדוקטור קרול הופמן, היועצת השקטה והחכמה שמאחורי הקלעים, אנחנו אוהבים אותך קרול, ולכל שאר חבריי המקסימים בהנהלת האיגוד ובוועדת התרבות שמתנדבים כבר יחד איתי 20 שנה בפעילות כאן בבית וילנה. במקום המיוחד הזה שהיה בית להורינו השורדים, שהיה להם בית לזיכרונות, לאזכרות. להזכרות ולהתרפקות על בית ילדותם שאבד. יצרנו מרחב אישי לנו כבני דור ההמשך של השורדים מווילנה והסביבה. מרחב קהילתי קולקטיבי פעיל ביותר של הנצחה ומורשת תרבות של בני קהילת הליטווקים בארץ ובעולם. ברוכים הבאים לכם כולם. ביום זה יותר מתמיד אנו חשים את השליחות החשובה שהפקידו הורינו בידינו. לא להפסיק להיות סקרנים, להמשיך לחקור ולתעד, ללמוד וללמד, לזכור תמיד, להזכיר ולא לתת להשכיח את האלימות הנוראית שקיבלה לגיטימציה באירופה והביאה לפשעים הנוראים ולרציחות הבלתי נתפסות של עמנו. אנחנו כאן היום, כולנו, להסתקרן, להקשיב, לשאול שאלות את מי שהסתקרן ולקח על עצמו להעמיק לחקור. מי שניסה להבין את הסוגיה הבלתי אנושית הזאת שטלטלה והשמידה מיליוני בני אדם, שרצחה בדם קר ובנפש חפצה 220 מיהודי ליטא בתוך כאוס הכיבוש הגרמני באירופה, ודווקא בעיקר בידי שכניהם הליטאים. ובאירופה ממשיך התהליך, לא של הרציחות, אבל של השנאות. בימים אלה, בהם קבוצות רבות בעולם מקצינות עמדות עד כדי ביטול אופציות למתינות ולהתפשרויות, אנחנו עומדים כאן כדי לשמור שלא ירצח זכר השואה וזכר האומללים שנרצחו בשואה ימשיך להדהד ולקחיה לא יישכחו. אני מבקשת להזמין את גברת לינה אנטנוביצ'ינה, שגרירת ליטא בישראל, לומר את דבריה. פליז.
Sorry, take my own order. Erev Tov, good morning, Labas Rytas. It's always my big pleasure to be here in this very special place. You know, officially,
Lina, microphone. And then we gotta give it.
now it's better? Good. Officially, our embassy and my residence is kind of piece of Lithuania in this country, and we always, when we welcome people at the embassy, we say welcome to Lithuania. But I think there is one more place which is as well piece of Lithuania, and this is this place, Beit Vilna. Every time I come here, it's like, you know, now it's is it okay you hear?
Yes.
It's every time like really being at home, because these people, members of association, Miki, Yarit, and all others, you make it us diplomats feel like at home here with you. And very often we come here to celebrate on different occasions. Today we come here to commemorate. We come here today to commemorate victims of Holocaust, those 6 million innocent people who were murdered during the tragic days of Shoah. We gather to commemorate them all over the world, here in Israel, United States, Europe, including my country, Lithuania, which unfortunately was one of those countries who lost practically all its Jewish citizens. It is especially painful because Lithuania was a well-known center of Jewish studies, culture, arts, literature. Jewish people played a very important role in the creation of our state. They were our people. devoted, educated, smart, intelligent, loving their own country leader. So losing them was like losing part of ourselves. It is even more difficult for me, ambassador of Lithuania, to acknowledge that my own fellow Lithuanians collaborated with Nazis. And this guilt will never disappear. Today we also remember those who saved Jews, our righteous. They risked their own lives to help innocent people, while others collaborated with the murderers, or kept silent, hiding with their doors and curtains closed. Did they all had other choice? Why did they act one or another way? It is so very much important to remember those victims, to know what happened to them, to give every victim a name. It is very much important to know facts and numbers. But even more important is to understand why did it happen. Only if we understand not only what happened, but why did it happen, we will be ready to prevent such horrors from happening again, to explain it to our young generation and help them to build a much better world without hatred. That's why I'm so pleased to have Dr. Diekmann today with us. Dr. Diekmann does not need an introduction. We all perfectly know what an important work he does in order to help all of us to understand why such tragedy took place. Thank you, Doctor, for sharing your precious time and your knowledge with us today. I also want once again to thank Mickey Cantor for the true friendship and collaboration. As I already mentioned, you are always here for us, and we try to always be here for you. Yarit, special thanks goes to you. Thank you for your enthusiasm, your hard work. I mean, you made it happen, because she spent a lot of time organizing this event. And actually, my last thank you goes to our dear honorary consuls, Amnon Dotan and Shai Schnitzer, for their financial support, which as well helped to organize this event. And thank you so much to all those young people, soldiers, who came to share this very meaningful day or half a day with us. Toda Rabba, and here I stop.
תודה לינה. אני מבקשת להזמין את יניב בן קרן לומר מספר מילים בשם המחלקה. תודה.
בוקר טוב לכולם, בוקר טוב גם לאנשי יוצאי בוקר טוב לכולם, בוקר טוב לאנשי יוצאי וילנה, בוקר טוב למחלקה היקרה. האירוע הזה ביום השנה הבינלאומי לשואה ולגבורה הוא חשוב במספר היבטים. השואה למעשה הייתה האירוע המרכזי ביותר בתולדות העם היהודי, מלבד תקומת מדינת ישראל במאה הקודמת. והייתה אחת הסיבות המרכזיות לתקומת המדינה. היום בו אנחנו ניצבים גם כמייצגים של צבא הגנה לישראל, שאחד מההבטחות הגדולות ביותר שלו היא להבטיח שהשואה והזוועות שחוללו בעולם היהודי יהיו לא עוד. אני מבקש להודות פה גם לבית וילנה על שיתוף הפעולה, אבל כך שאנחנו מוזמנים ונמצאים פה איתכם תקופה כל כך ארוכה. שיתוף הפעולה הזה, אני חושב, הוא חשוב מאוד גם לאנשי המחלקה וגם לכם. בעיקר להבין את החשיבות של הקשר בין ניצולי השואה, בין הדור השני והדור השלישי, לדור הצעיר, לדור הרביעי, לדור החמישי, שמשרת עכשיו בצבא. אנחנו פה איתכם, ואנחנו נמשיך להיות פה איתכם. אני רוצה גם להודות גם לאלעד, שממשיך את הקשר הזה בצורה הצמודה ביותר, והוא הנציג של המחלקה פה, ושנמשיך ככה את שיתופי הפעולה. תודה לכם.
איזה גאווה. תודה. אנחנו נפתח את האירוע בטקס יזכור. הרב שאול פרבר הגיע, ואנחנו נדליק 6 נרות לזכר 6 המיליונים. אלעד, השנה ידליקו את הנרות נציגי חיל הים. אחרי התפילה אני כבר מודיעה, תיקח את המיקרופון יערית והיא תמשיך את ההנחיה של האירוע באנגלית. אז תודה. שאול פרבר.
נקרא פרק תהילים, אזכרה ואחר כך קדיש, לעילוי נשמות כל הקדושים שנהרגו, 6 מיליון שנהרגו על קידוש השם. על קידוש השם, כי כל מי שנהרג בגלל שהוא יהודי זה על קידוש השם. שיר מזמור לאסף, אלוהים, אל דומי לך, אל תחרש ואל תשקוטל, כי הנה אויביך יהמיון, ומשנאיך נשאו ראש. על עמך יערימו סוד, ויתייעצו על צפוניך. אמרו, לכו ונכחידם מגוי, ולא ייזכר שם ישראל עוד. כי נועדו לב יחדיו, עליך ברית יכרותו. עולי אדום וישמעאלים, מואב והגרים, גבל ועמון ועמלק, פלשת עם יוש וצור, גם אשור נלווה עמם, היו זרוע לבני לוט סלע. עשה להם כמדיין, כסיסרא, כיבין ונחל קישון, נשמדו בעין דור, היו דומה לאדמה. שיתם ונדיבנו כאויב זאב, וזבח צלמונה כל נסיכנו. אשר אמרו נרשלנו את נאות אלוהים. אלוהי, שיתמוך הגלגל כקש לפני רוח, כאש תבער יער וכלהבה תלהט הרים. כן תרדפם בשעריך ובסופתך תבהלם. מלא פניהם קלון ויבקשו שמך אדוני. יבושו ויבעלו עדי עד ויחפרו ויובדו וידעו, כי אתה שמך אדוני לבדיך, עליון על כל הארץ. אל מלא רחמים שוכן לאומים, דיין אלמנות ואבי יתומים, אמצא מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מאירים ומזהירים, לנשמות אחינו ואחיותינו יהודי ליטא ומשמות הפרטיזנים ורבבות אלפי ישראל בכל מקומות ובכל ארצות אירופה, אנשים ונשים, ילדים וילדות שנהרגו ושנשחטו, שנשרפו ושנטבעו, שנחנקו, שנקברו חיים ושהומתו בכל מיני מיתות משונות ואכזריות בידי המרצחים הגרמנים ועוזריהם משאר גרוריהם מכל הארצות, ושהלכו לעולמם על קידוש השם, בעבור שאנו מתייחדים עם זכרם ומתפללים לעילוי נשמתם. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתם, וגן עדן תהא מנוחתם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, ויזכור לנו עקדתם, ותעמוד לנו לכל ישראל זכותם, ויעמדו לגורלם לקץ הימין, ונאמר אמן. קדיש. יתקדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועלמד יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון ובמכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. יהא שמי רבה מברך לעלם ולעלמי עלמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה בריחו, לעילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמא ואמרו אמן. יהא שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. יעשה שלום ירומיו ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן.
יהי זכרם של 6 המיליונים ברוך. תודה. אני מזמינה את שמואל בן צבי לקרוא שיר שקבע נכדתו ולא יכלה להגיע היום, ואז נמשיך.
פתאום הייתה צריכה לעבור בחינות היום לפני צהריים, וביקשה לקרוא מה שהיא כתבה. חודש ימים היא הקדישה לזה כדי לכתוב. מחר בכל העולם מציינים את יום השואה הבינלאומי. אני, אמילי גולדווסר, בת 13, דור רביעי לניצולי השואה, מרגישה צורך לציין את זכרם של 1.5 מיליון ילדים שנספו בשואה. שני הסבים הרבים שלי שרדו את מלחמת העולם השנייה. סבא רבא דניאל היה בגטו קאונס ובמחנה ריכוז דכאו. סבא רבא בני, בנימין, גם הוא היה בגטו קאונס ובמחנה ריכוז שטוטהוף. שניהם היו בסכנת מוות, ושניהם שרדו למרות הכל. וכמו המשפחה שלי, אני גם מרגישה שאסור לנו לשכוח את מה שהם עברו ואת הגבורה שלהם. את הזיכרון שלנו אנחנו צריכים להמשיך ולהעביר לדורות הבאים כפי שקיבלנו מההורים שלנו. ותודה לכם שבאתם לכאן לציין את יום הזה, ואני מצטערת שלא יכולה להגיע, ובנוסף אני רוצה להודות לבית וילנה והסביבה. תודה רבה.
האמת שאני לא רגילה לדבר מפה. I want to read just a few words to present our honorable guest, and I hope becoming our friend. Dr. Christoph Diekmann. Now he was born, should I say how old you are? Yeah, okay. He was born in 1960 in Lower Saxony. He's a German historian and writer, researcher at the Fritz Bauer Institute, and one of the leading Holocaust experts of Holocaust in Lithuania. Christoph won the International Book Award for Holocaust research from Yad Vashem, and he had a 2-volume edition of German occupation policy in Lithuania, 1941-1944. He's a member of the International Commission for the Evaluation of Crimes of the National Socialist and Soviet occupation regime in Lithuania. Christoph studied history, sociology and economy in Göttingen, in Jerusalem and in Hamburg. He taught modern European history in Kiel University, United Kingdom. Researched Yiddish historiography on history of the Russian Civil War at the Fritz Bauer Institute. How many names of... Okay. In Frankfurt am Main, and has worked as postdoctorate researcher at the University of Bern in the project of Sound of Anti-Jewish Persecution. He defended his thesis for the degree of Doctor of Science in History on the topic of the German policy of the occupation in Lithuania during the Second World War. And since 2005, he has been teaching modern European history at the English University of Kiel. And from the beginning of September 2011 to 2013, Christoph Diekmann worked as a research fellow at the Fritz Bauer Institute, where he conducted a 2-year research project of stereotype of Jewish Bolshevism. Also, he took part in the International Conference of Judo-Bolshevism at the Yad Vashem Memorial. The Holocaust in Lithuania, he participated in the conference How Massacres Began, marking and remembering the murder sites of summer-autumn 1941 in Vilnius, Lithuania. His study on German occupation policy in Lithuania was published in 2011 and was awarded the Yad Vashem International Book Prize for Holocaust Research. Now, his latest publication is with the Lithuanian author Ruta Vanagaitė, where they held a series of talks on common history of Germany and Lithuania in Europe during the Shoah. The talks were published at the end of 2011. How did it happen? Understanding the Holocaust. There, he explores the causes and consequences of central group involved, Jews, Lithuanians, and Germans. His research is based on sources in all the key languages, and he knows these languages: Yiddish, Ivrit, Lithuanian, and German. And what's important, he shows that the Holocaust could not have unfolded throughout German-occupied Europe without the cooperation of non-Germans in each country. At present, he has a fellowship at Vienna Wiesenthal Institute and the Fortunov Audio Archive in jail, and he is teaching, mostly via Zoom, at the Haifa University in the Weiss Livnat International Program of Holocaust Studies. Okay, and I think it's time that you come up here and begin to tell us what we do not know. Thank you. That's yours? Yes. I took it.
Well, and the first page is still missing.
It's my fault. No, that's mine.
מישהו לקח את העמוד הראשון שלי. מיקי, לקח?
לא הצלחתי אותה.
אז מצאנו אפשר לשמוע אותי גם מאחורה? בסדר. גבירותיי ורבותיי, תודה רבה להזמנה לבוא לבית וילנה ולתת פה הרצאה. אני שמח מאוד שאנחנו נפגשים היום ונחשוב יחד על העבר, שננסה ללמוד יחד על השואה. בשבילי זה משהו במיוחד מאוד שהאיגוד יוצאי וילנה והסביבה הזמין גרמני לא יהודי לכאן. תן לי להמשיך באנגלית ולא בעברית קלה שלי. During our first 30 minutes or so, I will try and explain my basic approach, my questions, and my use of terms. And after that, we will have plenty of time for debate and further questions. So first, I would like to remind us of some basic elements of the Nazi mass crimes we are trying to reconstruct and analyze. Close to 13 million people fell victim to the NS regime in Europe outside of direct warfare. 12 to 13 million people. The largest groups were, as you see, Jews, approximately 5.8 million, Soviet prisoners of war, 3.3 million, Soviet civilians in the borders of 41, about 2 million, ethnic Polish civilians, about, I would say, up to 1 million, of forced laborers, 500,000 did not survive. So we see that 45% of the victims, 5.8 million, were Jews. 55%, 6 to 7 million, were non-Jews of Nazi crimes. And almost all of them were non-Germans. 97% of the Jewish victims were non-German Jews. 95% of the non-Jewish non-German victims, of non-Jewish victims were non-Germans. So, and far over 90% of the victims died outside Germany in occupied or allied countries. When did these millions of Jews and non-Jews fall victim to the Germans? Until August 1939, the number of murdered victims of Nazi crimes was still under 10,000. Till August 1939, still under 10,000. With the attack on Poland in September 1939, the numbers jumped to 200,000 until summer 1941. 200,000 until the summer of 1941. Half of them mentally disabled, mostly murdered in Germany, some also in occupied Poland, close to 100,000. Then we have 50 to 60,000 Polish civilians in the framework of the decapitation policy of the Polish elite by the German occupiers. 50,000 Polish victims. So at that time, and then we have, of course, not forget, 40 to 50,000 starved and murdered Jews in the Polish ghettos, especially in Warsaw. That is overall the estimation of the victims till summer 41. At that point, summer 41, when we look at the Soviet policies or the Japanese policies, they had killed millions at that point of time already. Italy and Spain, Italy and Africa and Spain in the war, also many thousands more than Germany. That is summer 41. Now the number of victims then exploded in the summer of 41 with the attack on the Soviet Union. We have 3 more millions until spring 42. 3 more millions within little over half a year. And those victims were 2 million Soviet prisoners of war, by far the largest victim group over the first 9 months. Soviet prisoners of war by far the largest victim group. Close to 1 million Jews to that point of time. So that is then spring 42. And then till the end of the war, till 45, we have 9 more million victims of crimes. So you see the curve goes like this. Yeah? Happened over 98% of the German-induced murder took place after the German surprise attack on the Soviet Union in June 41. And this means that in analytical terms, we should link the Shoah and the other mass crimes to the conduct of war and to the German policy of occupation. It happened almost all during the last 4 years of the war, and it happened outside Germany, occupied or allied countries. Now, 2 basic triangles have emerged for me as the guiding principles, as tools for asking the questions. What was the relation between the mass crimes, especially the Shoah, the conduct of war, and the occupation policy? There must be some relation between this. How did these 3 fields influence each other? Very often the single fields are isolated from each other. We talk about crimes here, we talk about occupation there, and we talk about war there. Yeah, but it happened all at the same time, in the same space. So I try to relate these in order to get the context right, the context of the mass crimes right. Now, the question of the relation, I mentioned that already, between Germans, Lithuanians and Jews. Now emphasizes an approach which reconstructs and analyzes the different perspectives of the most important acting groups. So I have tried to understand the distinct logics which dominated the behavior of the different groups. What drove those groups? The Germans, the Lithuanians and the Jews. Now the questions of their specific experiences and their specific expectations are serving here as a focusing principle for the research. There's a very good German historian called Reinhard Koselleck who termed that Erfahrungsräume, like spaces of experience, and expectations horizons. What do I expect? And with these 2 questions, what did these groups experience and what do they want? What do they expect? From that, this determines to a large extent what they do, what they actually try to do, then in relation to the other groups, in the specific context. So I put these in inverted commas, Germans, Lithuanian Jews, because of course we are just allegedly looking at inter-ethnic struggles here. What the Nazis would term Volkstumskämpfe. Yeah? Ethnic nationalism, yes, was dominant in this time span, in the 30s and 40s. But this concept of ethnic nationalism should not be our main category, our maßstab for the analysis of what happened, as a category of analysis. The real history was much more complicated and differentiated than these collective singulars suggest. Therefore, we do not judge ethnicities, but we try to understand what happened using historiographical concepts. We must not follow a völkisch approach. You might have noticed that I have added a question mark to the title that the association had given for this lecture. Now, both triangles were intertwined and entangled. One cannot really analyze in a sufficient way the relations between warfare, occupation policy and mass crimes without including the relations between Germans, Lithuanians and Jews. And one cannot really study the relation between Germans, Lithuanians and Jews without the context of warfare, occupation and crimes. So I've tried to combine the both triangles and the related questions and to study them on a broad empirical basis. Here's where the question of languages come in. Yeah? It's difficult to study this European entangled history without being able to work in a few languages. For the Vilna region, during the Shoah, we need German, we need Lithuanian, we need Yiddish, we need Hebrew, some Russian doesn't harm, yeah? And I have to admit that I cannot work with Polish sources or literature, except in translations. Yeah? When working as an historian, I've learned to always use concepts of power and choice. So what has really advanced our analysis of power is to think power not as something that somebody has, as a kind of possession, as a constant attribute of somebody, but to understand power as an effect of relations between peoples and groups. If we think of power as a relational issue, then we have to rearrange our approach to analyze power. We need to add to the top-down approach the view from the bottom up. Since we have here also so many soldiers taking part, let's shortly mention the characteristics of an order and the fear of an order. Yes, it forces you from above to do something, but there's more to it. It also allows you to do something without taking full responsibility for it. And the concept of order depends on the concept of obedience. An order loses its value if nobody obeys. The concept of order makes sense only in this relational context. So in the German-Lithuanian case, we have many examples where Lithuanians did obey German orders, using them as permissions to pursue their own agendas. And we have many examples where Lithuanians did not obey German orders because they contradicted their own agenda. We might come back for details here in the discussion later on. What do I mean with the concept of choice? Let me use German historiography as an example. For quite a long time, the dominant picture of the Third Reich in historiography was that people just followed orders from above. Hitler and a few other evil men had forced through orders everybody else to participate in violent crimes. Goebbels brainwashed the German people. This simple picture of order and obedience was then challenged in the 1970s by the claim that anonymous structures and processes were more important than orders from above. Now this time, in the picture of structures and anonymous processes. This time the people acting were not just obeying, but were characterized as mindless cogs in the wheel. Just opportunistic bureaucrats, technocrats, who didn't really think about what they were doing in a complicated process. Division of labor, how can we know what happened there? But both strands do not really integrate into their models the notions of freedom, choice, and responsibility of the society, groups, and individuals involved in the crimes. In fact, today I would claim that both concepts, the one order from above and the other about anonymous structures, were coined to evade questions of responsibility in real court situations after the war and in post-war struggles of memory politics. They're taken from Nazism perpetrators trying to defend themselves. We had orders, or we didn't really know what happened, it just happened. Now, since the 1990s, the basic assumption has become stronger and stronger that each and everybody in at least some way has at least in some way a choice of what to do, how to act and how to react in situations, in difficult situations. What we see is that people in the same or similar situations actually make different and diverse choices. There exists no determinism or automatism of how people will behave. We don't judge people from hindsight. If we want to see what options were there, we look at what did people do at the time. Because all the range was done. We don't know better now. But we look at how was the behavior then, and then we see, well, a lot of different behaviors was possible. So there's no determinism here, no automatism. Let's now turn to a few deliberations on the historical background of the Shoah. Before the German attack on the Soviet Union in June 1941, we have source-based evidence for two planned mass murders. German plans before the attack on the Soviet Union. One against the alleged Soviet bearers of the Soviet state. It was planned to decapitate the Soviet state with the purpose to ease the conduct of war and to cause the collapse, the implosion of the Soviet system, state system. This followed the German model against Poland, but on a much bigger scale. And many of the Jewish men were included for anti-Semitic reasons. We have anti-Semites planning a war here. Jewish men were included in this victim group. They were seen as bearers of the Soviet state and potential resistors. They were seen as Jewish Bolsheviks, the men. It was the first murder plan. We decapitate the Soviet Union, it will ease our warfare. Second plan was to starve 30 million Soviet citizens, mostly great Russians, mostly Russians, within a very short time, within 6 to 9 months. Why? In order to be able to feed the German troops. Can you still hear me? The German troops, the populations under German control, and to be able to continue the war against the Anglo-Saxon forces, the US and the UK. Now these victims of the hunger plan were to be murdered as competitors for scarce resources, especially food. So,
he moved away anyway.
אז למה סגרת את האפשרות?
כדי שהוא יראה אותי.
So, two mass murder planes. 30 million Soviet Russians, mostly Russians, and to decapitate the Soviet state. Now, we do not have evidence for short-term plans to kill all Soviet Jews. Don't have them. Or to kill millions of Soviet prisoners of war. Yeah? But that is what actually happened. Very quickly. I told you already, in the first 9 months, 2 million Soviet prisoners of war, 1 million Jews. It wasn't planned. Many thousands of Jewish men and non-Jewish communists, yes, were murdered, and soon whole Jewish communities were murdered, close to 1 million until spring 42. And the largest murder, I mentioned it again, the third time now, taking place until spring 42, was actually the murder of Soviet prisoners of war, 2 million until spring 42. But why? In short, because the German plans did not work at all, or just in some smaller parts. And the Germans modified their activities. They left their older plans and created quickly doable new ones for a variety of anti-Semitic reasons. To detail that crucial change of politics would be too much for a short introduction now, but we can go into that in the discussion. Now let's specify this process of the German mass murder practice during the war using the example of Lithuania. Numbers of victims in Lithuania, it's 420,000 according to my estimate. Yeah? So we have close to 200,000 Jews from Lithuania, plus 5,800 Jews from the West, from Germany, Austria and France, which were deported to the area. Then we have, including the Klaipėda area, about 170,000 prisoners of war. And then we have a victim group which was completely forgotten, but everybody actually, 40,000 evacuated civilians from territories further east. Soviet civilians from the region of Orsha, Bryansk, which were killed inside the Lithuanian territory in 43 and 44. And then we have about 5,000 victims from diverse groups like Lithuanians, Polish, Russian civilians, Soviet activists, families of evacuated Soviet functionaries, civilian victims of German anti-partisan warfare, much less than in Belarus or in Ukraine, some gypsies and some mentally disabled. So that is the overall picture of the people who did not survive the German occupation. Now, how did this develop? We have approximately 20,000 mainly Jewish men killed during the first 7 weeks of 7 weeks of the occupation until the end of July. Then the civil administration, the German civil administration, replaced the military administration. So we have about 1,100 victims through pogroms, about which we talk so much, but for the overall picture, they are not really important. And we have over 18,000 Jews shot, mostly during July, in Lithuania. Now, as a general rule, I would give a number of about 5,000 victims per area, per Gebietskommissariat, as the Germans would call it. Yeah? Maybe I can show it like this. We have 4 Gebietskommissariate. It's Šiauliai, Panevėžys, Vilnius area, Kaunas area. And we have about 10,000 victims here in the north, Šiauliai and Panevėžys, and 5,000 to 6,000 here, and about 5,000 here. Yeah? The surviving Jewish population, mainly women, children and elderly men, were to be squeezed in ghettos. In July 41 already. As a result of this German policy, we find at the end of July about 100 ghettos in the provinces all over Lithuania with about 90,000 Jews. It was still open. What would happen to them? They were living in dire conditions. Their situation was sheer horror. Now, when the German civil administration came in and replaced the military administration the last week of July 41, which questions did it have to answer, the German politicians who now arrived? On paper, its task was to prepare the region for German annexation. This will be ours meaning German. In practice, the task was overwhelmingly defined by the function of this region as an hinterland for the fighting German armies. And because of the ongoing and ever more critical war, this hinterland function of occupied territories, that is true for all of Europe, remained paramount. So on paper it said this, but in practice was that. For the German politicians, this meant that the main problem was, the main dilemma in summer 41 and throughout the whole period till 44, how to exploit the country in an extreme way. We need everything from this area for the warfare, and how to keep it stable at the same time. How do we balance, we German politicians, how do we balance terror and force on the one side, scaring off people, and keeping the non-German willingness to cooperate so that the non-Germans would stay with us, the German conqueror. How do we balance it? That's a key problem of occupation policy, the key problem, I would say. Now, at the end of July, being just a few days there, at the beginning of August, the Germans decided for this region, end of July, beginning of August, to kill all Jews in Lithuanian and Latvian provinces, in the countryside. Those in the improvised provincial ghettos, they were to be murdered, and then to select the Jewish population in the cities, in Vilna, in Kovno, in Shavli. Take part of the Jews into the ghetto and kill the rest. We Germans need bit forced labor force until we can replace them by Soviet prisoners of war. They will work for us, by Lithuanians who have learned how to work their jobs, and even Poles. We can use Poles instead of Jews for the world labor which needs to be done. That was the plan. Ghettos for a few months, and then we will replace them by Soviets, Poles and Lithuanians. Again, it didn't happen. Now, in an escalating and accelerating way, the provincial Jews were murdered in a coordinated effort by German and Lithuanian police. Preparations were made by German and Lithuanian administrations in the villages, shtetls, counties and cities. I go back to the map here. Starting in the north, starting in the north, in the area of Šiauliai, in Biržai, Mažeikiai, Rokiškis, in this area, in Dunaburg is here. This is the way to Leningrad, the most important warfare zone for Hitler till middle of September, and for the whole German Nazi administration for the whole of Europe. So the murder started in this area, and then moved back, like this, in the north. So in August and September, that is before Babin Yar in Kiev, before the end of September in Kiev, where over 30,000 Jews were shot in 2 days, we have 50 to 60,000 victims here. So I would claim here's actually where the Shoah started. It's one of the main reasons, one of the main regions. There are also regions in Ukraine and in Belarus where it was like that, but this is sort of the key area because it was on the way to Leningrad. And then it moves to Kaunas area and to Vilnius area, and after that to the cities. So in the cities we have those selections, where the grandparents went through. In August and September, 11,000 Jews killed in Kaunas, 30,000 put in the ghetto. In Vilna, over 33,000 killed, 20,000 put in the ghetto, 25,000. The surviving Jews were squeezed into the city ghetto. We count over 150,000 victims till the end of 41. Over 150,000 victims till the end of 41, and find over 240 mass graves spread all over Lithuania. I just think of that because many of us are using always the Jäger report. The report from Einheitskommando 3 for learning. Jäger report concerns only the center. Only the center. Here was Einheitskommando 2. And we don't have many records from them. We have trials, and we have the local reports, but we don't have a report like them from as we have from the Einheitskommando 3, which became later the key security police center in Kaunas. So this is Einheitskommando 2, and here we have Einheitskommando 9. Yeah? So Jäger report covers only part. Yeah? We have to be aware of that. And at the beginning we have the Sonderkommandos, yeah, for the first few days, which were also in that region. The Einsatzkommandos came after that, 1 or 2 weeks after that. Yeah? Now, also in Lithuania, the Soviet prisoners of war were dying in July and August already from hunger, exhaustion, diseases, and from October onwards from cold. So the ghettos in the cities were actually larger than planned. When you look at the Jäger report, you see 15,000, 15,000, 3,000. That was supposed to be. Yeah? And actually we all know it was bigger, it was larger than that. Yeah? But that was a plan. But because they couldn't replace the Jewish work by Soviet prisoners of war, it had to be the other way around. Yeah? The Probeaktion, Bekovno, the September, yeah, was actually one which was stopped in the middle of selecting the people, because the Jews were supposed, instead of getting killed, to work in the airfield encounters. And shortly afterwards, they went to Alexotas. Yeah, because the prisoners of war were dying, they had to be replaced. 1,000 at first, then 2,000, and then ever more. Yeah? So those two fates are linked between the Soviet prisoners of war and the Jewish victims. Not in principle, but in the details. There are a lot of links here. Labor is the clue. Now, labor, meaning labor for the war, German war effort. That's what was interesting for the occupation forces. Slowed the murder process down against Lithuanian Jews, and stopped it in Lithuania at the end of 41 until 43. Yeah? So 1942, beginning of 1943 is the time of the relatively stable period for the ghettos in Vilna, Kovno and Shavli. And the many smaller labor camps, they erected in 42 in the over 50 in the whole countryside. First, we Germans kill all of them, and then we have to erect camps again because there's so much work to be done. Spring and summer 43, the security issue became allegedly so urgent again, more important than labor, more important than food, that mass killings were starting again. At first in the southeast of Lithuania, where Soviet partisans became more active. So that's the right down corner, the Vilna area over there. Yeah? So then we also see the destruction of the Vilna ghetto in September 43. Yeah? And the transforming of the remaining ghettos and camps in Lithuania in concentration camps under the administration of the SS. And only now the SS comes in as a ruling force, not just as an executing force. Until then it was politicians and city administrations which had run all the ghettos. Yeah? Only now the SS comes in and takes over as concentration camps. And then in the summer of 44 the Red Army reoccupied the region and the Germans destroyed all the remaining camps. Just at one sentence, destruction of the Vilna ghetto fort in autumn 43, it might be of special interest here. How did the Germans figure? We're losing now for security reasons, Jews are dangerous here with the partisans, the Jewish workers. How do we replace them? By the incoming Soviet evacuees. That was the plan. And they went through all the factory shops, counting who can be taken out, and with what do we need to replace them? By the Soviet evacuees. It never worked, but that was the plan. That's how they legitimized for themselves, okay, we get rid of the Jews, but we don't lose in labor. Again, another victim group comes in, and in the details it's really connected, historically, not for moral reasons, or we have to think of all victim groups, no, for historical reasons. Yeah? Their fate is linked. As we all know, the Germans were not acting alone. Large parts of the occupied Lithuanian society cooperated with the German occupier. Now this happened not only in Lithuania, but in all parts of Europe under German control. That Europe turned into a trap for the Jews in 1941, with almost no way out anymore, was a result of this non-German cooperation with the Germans. So this is a major reason why we have to look at the history of the Shoah from a European point of view and not from a national point of view. And in many respects, we have to look at it even as global history. We have to include the US, we have to include Shanghai, we have to include, actually it's global history in parts. So the Germans were not acting alone, but the Germans were also not almighty. We're not almighty. The Germans depended on the cooperation, and here the concept of power and choice come in again. Power and choice to explain what's happening with the cooperation of the non-Germans. So no matter where you look, example Lithuania, example Ukraine, example Poland, example France, example Holland, the Germans needed the non-German cooperation to achieve something. Main problem of the occupation policy, how do we sustain the readiness, the willingness of the non-Germans to stay with us, to cooperate with us, and not go into massive resistance. Over the 3 years, 41 to 44, in the Lithuanian case, the policy of non-German cooperation of the Lithuanian politicians and groups and soldiers and whoever changed. It's different 41, different from 44. That's why, to give you one example only, we find those 48 Lithuanian politicians and police functionaries in 1943 arrested for resistance against the Germans in German concentration camps in Stutthof. There are 48 of them, even though 25 of those 48 were massively involved in anti-Jewish policy in 41. Same people. Yeah? Vilna case. Then one of the leaders of the uprising, Professor Vladas Jurgutis, yeah? Then later Minister of Economy under the Lithuanian Provisional Government, and then General Counsellor when the government was abolished, he was among them. So one of the leaders of the uprising. Then for Chuberkis and Buragas, they were the two main middlemen between the German city administration in the small German city in Vilna and the ghetto, yeah, via the mayor of Vilnius. That was Chuberkas and Buragas, and they were both in concentration camps 2 years later. Same people, same motivation. We want to serve the Lithuanian national cause. Yeah, that's actually a fascist cause at that point of time. Also, the often discussed case of Jonas Noreika. He's in this group. Yeah. Lithuanian and European Jews were trapped. I think that this is actually the fundamental frame for looking at the Jewish side here. Again, we take power and choice into account. Jews were fundamentally powerless. And that created this nightmarish paradox of having to live in a 3-year-long period of choiceless choices. It's a link between being trapped and having no choice what to do. But at the same time having to make endless crucial choices all the time. And you're completely unable to really influence the situation. Choices, it's unbearable. After a certain point of time in 41, in the summer 41, power lay only with the non-Jewish groups. Only. The fate of the Jews was in somebody else's hands. That's why a Jewish army is so important. Yeah. The fate of the Jews was in somebody else's hands, even in hindsight, even after the war. And today, nobody has come up with an effective survival strategy for large parts or larger parts of the Jewish communities in Europe under these conditions. There was none. Everything possible was tried at the time, and it did not work. Let me conclude this introductory part before we go on to the discussion. It is very important which kind of questions we ask. They, in a way, predetermine the range of possible answers. If we assume a uniqueness of the Shoah in Lithuania, we imply that it was the Lithuanians and their character as a people who coined the specific course of the events of the Shoah. And that was not the case. It was the Germans who determined the course of events in specific contexts. Nobody else. In certain regions of the occupied Soviet Union, we see the same timing, the same speed of murderous processes as in Lithuania, in Latvia, in parts of Ukraine, and in parts of Belarus. And overseeing the whole time period until 1945, we see a murder rate of over 90% in all Soviet and Polish occupied territories, in all of them, over the 3 years. So I've tried to explain what my approach would be, and I'm referring back to the two triangles, to fully include the various involved groups into the picture, the German side, the non-German side, and the Jewish side, and to analyze the context fully including both warfare and its implications and the determinants of occupation policy. I think that then we will get a better understanding of what happened and why. Thanks a lot for listening. Now I give the floor back to Mickey or to Yarit, I don't know. And we have hopefully still some time for debate and discussion.
Okay, raise your... I see hands raising, so please... oh, yes, you're the first here, and we'll go... Yeah, come on.
Mark Blumberg. Thank you for your very educational talk. Can you talk about the Germans, the number of Germans in Lithuania? What were their roles? How much was administration? How much was actual killing? And how much was supervising the killing of them?
Can you repeat the question?
I will. The number comes from Mr. Blumberg, and the question comes from Mr. Blumberg, and he's asking for numbers of the German administration in relation to politics, in relation to the killing, to the murderous processes, and what he aims at, if I guess it right, is that the number of Germans was astonishingly small in Lithuania. Now, we have, at the crucial period, we heard about the murder going on in Šiauliai, Panevėžys, Vilnius. The German politicians, the staff of the civil administration, which was there at this point of time, was 10. 10 German politicians. The Gebietskommissariat, this German unit, it was only a head. You have one German staff, and their main task was to supervise the Lithuanian county chiefs, Kreischefs. That was the task. There was no German staff beneath the Gebietskommissariat. No, none. We only have in agriculture, because we Germans wanted to rob everything. You know, the hunger plan, which was then modified, so we have to take everything from the hinterland, including Lithuania. There were a few agrarian functionaries below the Gebietskommissariat, but otherwise none. All the executive staff was Lithuanian, completely. Yeah. Overall, we have over the full time span, we have about it depends on the time frame a little bit, between 600 and 900 German administrators in the whole region, in the whole area, 600 to 900 for a country of 3 million. In Poland, we have 15,000 Germans. 15,000 Germans only for 30 million. In France, we have 800 in the military administration, 800 Germans. That's why I say the Germans depended on the non-German readiness to cooperate. Yeah, everywhere. So, in the police, the same picture. Police forces, we have, it's something like between 100 to 200 in the German security police, and if you include the criminal police, sort of for ordinary crimes, then you get maybe to 300. And then you have ordinary policemen, like the traffic, whatever, yeah? We have another 200 or 300, depending a bit on the time and who's available. Not on leave, not sick, yeah? Just a few hundred. And we have close to 20,000 Lithuanian police, either stationed or mobile. Yeah? And what the Germans would also do, be clever. We would send Lithuanians to Belarus and to Poland and to Ukraine. And we would take into Lithuania Latvians, Ukrainians, or Vlasov Russians later on. Yeah? Mix it up and use them not in their home country but outside. Yeah? So the relation is incredible. Yeah? Now, matter of choice, and that's why it's so hard for the non-Germans to deal with this. Because when you look at the whole field of politics, agriculture, we wanted everything. Yeah? For summer 41, the harvest was miserable, was half than it was in 1939 because of the Soviet time in between and because of the war. That was half. And then the Germans came in and said, we want 60% of this harvest for us. We must take that. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to conduct this war, which is, of course, very important. And we leave you 40%. 40% of one half. Yeah? And you Lithuanians deal with that. Now imagine the 100 ghettos in the countryside. The local mayors, what are they supposed to give them? And they asked the Germans, please, what are we supposed to do? And said, give the Lithuanians first and what's left over to the Jews.
There was 96% of the Jews, which was 220,000 Jews, were murdered in Lithuania. So how did less than 1,000 Germans kill 220,000 if they were not just supervising the Lithuanians doing the killing? The majority of the murders were committed by Lithuanians, not by the Germans.
Very true. Was the question understood? Yeah? Yes, I will repeat. Now, he's asking how could those few Germans kill over 200,000 Lithuanian Jews? Yeah? And that's what I tried to explain. The Germans were just directing the process, making the decisions, and then depended on the Lithuanian police forces and the local administrations, which were Lithuanian administrations, to prepare everything, to separate the Jews, to rob the Jews. Partly we have it, which is also so hard to take for Lithuanians to take in. They're selling the property even though the people are still in the ghetto. Because the ghetto means expropriation. Ghetto means you take the group out, mostly of better homes, and put them in some places, either in the poorer quarter, or in synagogues, or in whatever, in holes in the forests. Just put a fence around it. And you already start to distribute what is left over in the village, in the Städte. Parallel. That's why the Hilberg scheme of one succession after another doesn't work here. It happened at the same time, in a kind of chaotic form. Yeah? So, now, the question is now, of course, why did those Lithuanians cooperate with them? Because we have, in Lithuania we have a main division in the 30s already, developing very strong in the 30s, between the people who would follow Smetona and the people who would follow Voldemaras. Meaning the most dominant group were the Christian Democrats and the right-wing conservatives, erecting the dictatorship at the end of 1926. Democracy is shaky, the left is coming in, the clergy loses its influence, the military loses its influence, so they made this putsch as in Poland in May 26 with Pilsudski becoming a dictator. Now this is parallel. Smetona becomes dictator, Voldemaras is on his side, but he's much more radical. So in concepts, if you think in concepts, Smetona was one of civic nationalism, inclusive. There's enough space for everybody. We take in the Jews, we take in the Poles, Russians, the Germans, whoever. There's enough space for everybody. And the task of Lithuanization of the Lithuanian society, because 50 years before, we have a handful of Lithuanian traders. And the cities were completely in non-Lithuanian hands. You don't find Lithuanians in Kaunas. It's all German, Russians, Poles, and Jews. 50 years later, it's a massive change. Yeah? So this long-term revolution was then accepted by Smetona. Okay, this goes its way, and we will not make anti-Semitic laws in independent Lithuania, even though we have a dictatorship. They could have, but they said no. We don't do that zoological racism of the Nazis. Don't do that. Voldemar said, not good enough. Not good enough. That's too weak. Because our society that we want to build is one of, just take the successful examples of the 30s. Germany, Italy, and often forgotten young Turkey. Young Turkey, the sort of replacing the old empires. They are the successful one. Democracy is over. Look at World War I. Capitalism is a disaster. Democracy is something that doesn't work. Liberalism is all values are gone in liberalism. So we want a strong ethnic, basically a fascist state, a healthy state. And what has harmed us in the past, talking about Voldemar's point of view all the time, what has harmed us in the past was the minorities. The Jews, the Russians, the Germans, and the Poles. Vilna region, the Jews were the main topic was the Poles. Yeah, because they had taken Vilna in 1920 and only was forcibly returned in 1939. And then first taken by the Soviets, then returned to Vilnius. So the main problem is what makes us weak is the Poles. So that's why the short period of Vilna in 39-40, when the Lithuanians are moving in, trying to take the Poles out, that wasn't funny. Not against the Jews, against the Poles. So what I want to say is the LAF, the Lithuanian Activist Front, founded in Berlin in November 1940 to prepare the war, was a coalition of all forces except the communists, which were not taking part, and later on some of the extreme right wing organized itself in the LNP, Lithuanian Nationalist Party, not in the LAF, yeah, which was kind of a federal bündnis, a union of the sort of more moderate forces, but overtaken. The spirit was all racist and anti-Semitic. But anti-Semitic doesn't mean here against the minority only. Yeah? Ethnic nationalism always has it against minorities. We want homogeneity. Only then we are strong. Yeah? Anti-Semitism is something else. And when you trace the history here, till 1940, anti-Semitism is basically one of ethnic nationalism. Jews harm the nation. And that's why they have to we have to turn them into citizens of second class, or get rid of them somewhere. Yeah? Not kill them, get rid of them, get them out of the state. This changed in 1940 because the Lithuanian trauma was not to having resisted the Soviets. Smetona fled secretly over the border to Eastern Prussia. The Lithuanian army was ordered to stand at the roads and wave. The Red Army coming in, the occupier. And the Red Army was coming in with 150,000 men. 150,000 men. Compare that to the few hundred Germans. The German soldiers were just going through when they attacked in 1941. They were leaving again. Yeah? So the point is, there was something which Lithuanian honor was harmed, was insulted massively. Now, what do the Germans do? We are clever. We're offering, now you Lithuanians, you aren't Bolshevists, we were only Bolshevists because of the Jews. That's why we have all these rituals, rabbis. I mean, rabbis going through the villages with Stalin pictures. Unimaginable. Unimaginable, yeah? So, but this was a German offer. You can get rid of the guilt with the Soviets, and we take you in if you blame it on the Jews. And we take care of the Jews. Yeah? So, second half of July, before the mass shooting starts, in big scale, when there's a putsch in the Lithuanian administration, the LNP comes in with the help of German Gestapo. Yeah? And the former conservatives are replaced by radicals. So now we have all those 28, 30, 32-year-olds in the Lithuanian administration. And they control completely the leadership of the police and the soldiers. All young men between 25, 27, 28, 30. And of course they want a better future, a fascist future for our land, a healthy one. Yeah? And they conduct this process. And the Germans understood it very well, what they're doing, because the Germans, policemen also, they were very young, except Jäger. Jäger is Yotzem Yaklal, who so he low.
Unusual.
And it's unusual, yeah. Most of the German policemen were young, 28, 30, 32. And they had a very good connection to these young Lithuanians, man. Yeah? Okay, and they said, okay, we trust you and you can do it on your own. We coordinate the whole thing. And there were questions from regions, from the police and the politicians, the Lithuanian politicians, the county chiefs. Famous examples, Audronis in Alytus. Yeah? Please, at the beginning of July, I have 800 Lithuanian partisans here. Let me solve the Jewish question in my county. No, don't get it. No? And then only later the Germans, they did it, but under German direction. So they didn't allow the Lithuanians to do killings on their own. It was beyond their competence. Beyond their competence. Throughout the whole time. The pogroms is something else. But they were relatively minor. 1,000 victims overall. That's it. Yes. I know it's difficult.
We have more than 400 in our village. 400 in July.
Which village is it?
Lithuanians also, only in Žemaitija, in the north.
Yeah,
they are there in the grave. We know every name.
We know it, yes, but the Germans were there.
Not one.
The Germans were there.
We know the Lithuanian person who directed it. He was later interrogated by the Soviets. He went to Siberia for 25 years. Came back. We know every man.
Take a microphone. Say it again, take a microphone.
No, we're here.
Okay. When you are talking about 1,000 people, Jewish people who were killed in a pogrom, I'm talking about a small village in Žemaitija. It's called Šalkinai. We know, our family who was left, we spoke to the people who survived, the Lithuanians. We have a diary of people who went to the forest and survived, and we know exactly every name who is there in the forest from this small village in Šalkinai and the bigger city Kelme. So it is 26th of July. And there was not one German there, not one. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's the end of July, exactly.
Yes.
So there's no distance here, my dear. There's no distance here. The distance is only this was done within a German framework. That's the distance. When we started to work in this infamous commission, like 15 years ago, we had the number from Dov Levi. There are about 40 places where we have pogroms before the Germans were in the country. And that's a crucial term, before or after. Because the moment the Germans are in, the situation changes completely. Because then we Germans are in charge. And we allow and we don't allow. So what we did, we tried to find all the pogroms in the country before, that's the point, before the Germans were in, meaning during the first week. And we have the huge ones in Kaunas. Well documented, numbers are kind of but well documented. And then we looked at the border strip, very closely, where we have the first mass shootings in Gajdei, Kretinga, Taurage, but all these were shootings, no pogroms, they're shootings. Then we went to shtetls further, Ogmerge, Utena, Rokishkis, Birge, all those places, Šalkinai, Mariampol, Mažeikiai, and we compared that. What happened there, where there were 5 days of Germans not being there. And what we did find was single murders, yes, single rapes, yes, single robberies, yes, public humiliations, yes, but no massive pogroms until the Germans were there. And then, when the Germans were there, then the nightmare really started for the Lithuanians, for the Jews. So the effect is, of course, is the same. So we count the dead bodies. in over 240 places in Lithuania. How did it get there? That's the question that we're trying to deal with. Yeah? And I would say we have to be aware that there's a difference between history, what really happened and why, and memory. Difference between history and memory. And there is a narrative in the Lithuanian case that let me start from this. In the moment I have this fellowship for the Vienna Wiesenthal Institute and the Fortuna Video Archive. Fortuna Video Archive is they were the first to record video testimonies from survivors. Yeah? And there you have some Lithuanian survivors, Lithuanian Jewish survivors saying, it's exaggerated, but it shows us the problem. There were 90% of the Lithuanian Jews were killed before the Germans were there. 90% of the Lithuanian Jews were killed before the Germans were there. And this means, this expresses a feeling, a view, an experience, I would say. I actually would say an experience, which is makes a lot of sense in the context of why does this witness talk about this like that? But it doesn't have much to do with history, with what actually happened. I made interviews in Lithuania myself. I went to people in Šiauliai, in Shavli, and they were telling me, and also in Israel, telling me this and this happened before the Germans were. And when you proved, so I went into the details. Oh, maybe that was a week later, maybe that was 2 weeks later. So we construct our narrative often and put in there emotions from our experience which are not really accurate. Meaning, I will do everything to honor the victims, everything. But we must be very careful in reconstructing the specific power relations, social relations, whatever, what happened in those counties. And when you look at my book, it's in German, unfortunately. I went through all the counties, through all of them, and tried to put in what I find for the main processes. And you do find single cases, but 400, no, you don't. I didn't find. I mean, there was sometimes 10, 15, 20 murders before the Germans were in. But not more. Even though the narrative goes like that. But we tried to, if we had found, I was working there as a German historian, right, in this commission, and until now, and I'm deeply ashamed, of course, of what we did. But I would be happy to blame you, I would be happy to blame the Lithuanians. But unfortunately, I can't really.
Actually, I wanted to ask a different question at all. Excuse my emotions.
Now, of course I excuse emotion. I'm also very emotional about this.
Actually, I've been interested in the German propaganda of the Judeo-communism in Lithuania, or directed to Lithuania. How did the German actually heat up the Jewish, the hate of the Jews in this very critical months before the German occupation?
Okay. Did everybody understand the question? Okay. Propaganda of Jewish Bolshevism before the occupation. The Germans didn't need to reinforce anything. It was in the countryside everywhere. I would say, like for those who don't really know that when Poland was attacked in autumn 1939, Germans would take 2/3 of the western parts, Soviets would come in and take 1/3 of the eastern part, including Vilna. And then there was a pact between Molotov and Ribbentrop, Hitler and Stalin, the Soviet-German non-aggression pact, and they would divide in the secret protocols the region. Now, at first Lithuania was in the Soviet sphere, and then it was traded and came back into the German sphere, but the Germans weren't even there yet. Meaning for like 9 months, Vilna region was not occupied, because Vilna was returned to Lithuania by the Soviets, which were in with a couple of thousands Red Army soldiers only by now. And then only in summer 1940, the whole region was annexed by blackmailing the politicians, annexed by the Soviet Union as so the whole region, meaning Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, at 13th, 14th, and 15th Soviet republics. So this was against the will of the people, even though today we know that there was much more support actually for the Soviets than we would like to believe in hindsight. Because the Soviets would of course make reforms, for example, in the agrarian sector. Very conservative, big farms, many small farms. Soviets come and say, we're distributing land. Yeah? So after 1 year of Soviet rule, we have 70,000 more larger Lithuanian peasants, of about 400,000 Lithuanian peasants. So 70,000 of them actually profited from that. And we find in the archive 200,000 applications to the Soviets for more land. Meaning there was strong support for various pieces of Soviet policy, but the overall picture, okay, but the overall picture was, I lost my. So the Jewish Bolshevism was a question. Soviet experience was varied. Some said, okay, this is actually not too bad, but overall there is no national independence, and that was sort of the religion of the time. Ethnic nationalism. Each nation must have its own state. Only then will we have a chance to survive on this planet. If not, we will vanish. Yeah. So all the younger ones were massively against Soviet rule because it meant losing independence. It meant losing independence. This is like it's like murdering Christ. It's the deepest crime you can commit. Yeah. From that side, and we have to understand that, not to justify it, but to understand that. And we have 1,000 people in Berlin, Lithuanian emigres, politicians, policemen, also security policemen from Lithuania. So getting away from and being sort of taken in by the German preparation for war. Yeah? And so we have this organizing sort of not in Berlin, and we have one in Kaunas and one in Vilnius. In Vilnius, the underground, Lithuanian underground, was destroyed by the Soviets in May 41. They discovered them and incarcerated them. In Kaunas, they didn't find them. And that's why they could function in Kaunas in the moment the Germans were coming in. And so we have about 600 leaflets in the first half year, produced by the LAF with German help also. Coming into the country and for the underground, but that is the typical Jewish and Bolshevik propaganda, where there is no real difference between the Lithuanian and the Germans. The difference is the Lithuanians were much more angry and full of despair in comparison to the Germans. We Germans were fine again already. We were ruling Europe basically. We won against France within no time, after having tried to fight them in the First World War for 4 years. Yeah? So we were strong and our honor was restored. We have to chase the Jews away. Yeah? We have one leaflet out of 600, one sentence, where it says, if a Jew was with the communists, you have to kill him on the spot. Yeah? But that was only in a duplicate produced in the country itself. And in all the rest, meaning in 99% of that, the message was get the Jews out. Forced emigration, not killing. Forced emigration, not killing. The killing impetus comes only from the German side. And then it's taken up by radical fascists in Lithuania. But it comes from the Germans, unfortunately. Exclusively. Yeah? No, we have only one question per person, please. That's what my boss says here.
It's not a question. My grandfather, Yitzhak Levin, was told in 1938 that he was the blacklist of the Soviets to be sent to Siberia. So he ran away to Bialystok. And he was not the only one. So a lot of Jews were forced to be transferred to Siberia in 38, sorry.
Yeah.
Carol, your question? I'm sorry.
Let me take. First of all, let me take the information on deportation, please, just shortly, because we have those massive Soviet deportations in 1940-41, not in 1938. There must be an error in the timeline here. And they developed slowly from the Soviet side, and they just before the Germans come in, they deport about close to 20,000. The numbers are much lower than we long thought. 20,000 potential cooperation, potential resistors from the Lithuanian side and Jewish side. Yeah, the Jewish percentage among this was about 13%, about the deportees, 13. And Dov Levin guessed something like 7%. No, it was higher, 13%. Yeah, 13%, and they were deported by force a week before the Germans went, and that saved their lives, actually, of the Jews. But for the Lithuanian side, the reaction was they run to the forest, because this was a nightmare, a violent nightmare which hadn't occurred there before. Yeah? Violence in the First World War was mostly directed by the Russians against the Jews. Evacuation of the Jews in 1915, yeah? Not against the Lithuanians. Lithuania the situation was bad, but was bearable. And they weren't deported. Only then they were deported. And from this group in the forests, they also took their weapons with them. From this group comes a lot of the partisans, the angry young men from the forest who would then attack the representatives of Bolshevik rule, the Jews. Even when they were fleeing, when they were doing what the LF wanted them to do, run away. Then they would kill them on the streets. We have many testimonies on that. On those big roads to Utena, Utmarge, Rukishki, Dvinsk. How many, it was filled with Jewish corpses by those partisans. Okay, just then you please.
First of all, small...
Sorry, just a moment. Since we have soldiers here and they are obliged to leave at 12:15, so we will ask for short questions and short answers. Okay? Those who would like to stay after the soldiers leave, you will have the opportunity to ask more detailed questions. Thank you.
So maybe we should open the floor only to soldiers now.
Yeah, if we have.
No, but just Boris,
But he
because he is waiting for you. Give him
And then the soldiers have to work.
Yes, after you.
First of all, a small remark. The mass murdering in Lithuania started not in the north, but in the east, in the west. On 23 of June, it was in Garzdai, then on 25 in Kretinga, and 27 in Palanka, where my grandfather was murdered. And Germans were there. Germans came by bicycles to Palanka in the morning of 22 of June. But the murdering was affected by local population, by Lithuanians. Is my remark. Now about the judo Bolsheviks. In the first delegation that came from Lithuania to Stalin to ask to annex Lithuania, among 22 members, 20 were Lithuanians, 1 Russian and 1 Jew. So the picture is differs from the mythos of Lithuanian anti-Semitism. And now about my question. We know that the Jews were murdered by local population in all the Europe, maybe except of Bulgaria and Spain. Why in Lithuania, where there were not pogroms, before the Jewish pogroms, before the war, the percent was so huge, 95%. There is no in any country in Europe, there was not such a huge percent. Why? Do you think about any reason?
Let me concerning the first mass shootings in the border strip in the west.
Yeah.
That is this region here, 25 kilometers across the German border. The Germans were attacking from here, And we have in Garstei and in Kretinga and in Tauraghe, we have shooting of Jewish men. 200, 300, 100, and they were executed by this is Klaipeda, by a special Einsatzkommando from Klaipeda, because the Germans were moving on fast.
From Tilsit. Group.
What?
Tilsit group.
Exactly, and they were taking policemen from Tilsit, policemen from. No, you're right. I mixed it up. The other way around. So security police from Tilsit and ordinary police from Klaipeda. And they would then tour here, but that is shooting of Jewish men. And very often at first in military form still. The form was different. And then they would come back in August and kill the rest of the communities. These shootings are included into the shooting of 20,000 Jewish men that are mentioned as a result of the first 6 weeks. Here I was talking about killing of all communities. Killing of all communities. That's a difference, big difference. Now, Jewish Bolshevism, one more sentence. When you start counting Jews among the Bolsheviks, this is already an anti-Semitic act. And this doesn't go to the key, to the coin, to the core of what Jewish Bolshevism is all about. Jewish Bolshevism is about Jewish conspiracy worldwide in the East and in the West. Jews are behind, I'm talking now as a Nazi, Jews are behind democracy, capitalism, liberalism, money in the West, and they are behind Bolsheviks, forced labor, gulag, no spiritual life, no culture, everything in the East. Yeah? So Jewish Bolshevism means actually, Bolshevism is just a tool in the hand of the Kahal, of those 36 rabbis who are secretly ruling everything, to rule the world. So it doesn't make a difference if in those 22 we counted all the Jews in Lithuania, in the Lithuanian security police, in the Lithuanian Soviet administration, in the Soviet and it's ridiculously low, but it doesn't matter, because Jewish Bolshevism is something else. It's an anti-Semitic view of how the world functions. Yeah. So just to that. So you don't get far with counting Jews. It can more or less, it has no influence whatsoever. Trotsky, yes or no, doesn't matter. Yeah, or no, whoever. Yeah. So, what was your actual question? Huh?
Why is it particularly Lithuania?
I don't agree. I simply don't agree. We have this high murder rates. We have them in all Soviet-occupied countries over the whole time, and in Poland as well. Yeah? Over 90. Over 90. This is a question of 1 or 2%. Doesn't matter. You have it all everywhere, and it's not a function of the people living there, because you have the same phenomena in like the killings. Where did the killings start? In north of Lithuania, and then in the east, behind the front in Ukraine, complete communities, and in Belarus in the east, behind the front. And like when all the 80% of the Jews in Lithuania were murdered, we have 80% of the... 95. I'm talking about the first half here. 80% were murdered till end of 41. 150,000, remember the number? And 45,000 in the ghettos. In Galicia, a bit more south, the other sort of center of Eastern European Jewry, we have 80% living. From 400,000, from 500,000, you have 400,000 still living in Galicia. Why? And it doesn't depend that the Poles there were less anti-Semitic or the Ukrainians were less anti-Semitic than the Lithuanians here. It depended on us Germans, on the context of the war, context of the occupation. That's why I'm so keen on widening our picture. Let's get the context right. It's not inter-ethnic struggles, no. This is about the world war done by us, under specific conditions, with 1918 in the back. We Germans were behind killing the Jews because we want to avoid a second 1918. We collapsed almost in 1918 because of the Jews. And when you listen to Hitler all the time, no 1918, no 1918, no 1918, all the time. And now because we Nazi leadership, we have Himmler, we have a problem less. Yeah? Because Himmler is securing everything, the hinterland. Yeah? It's a different approach. That's why I try to explain my approach. It's a different approach. The numbers around 96.8 of Lithuanian Jews were killed. No, the basis for this is there's no way of getting this so exact. Over 90, it's fine. Yeah, the chaos was much too big.
What documents do you have to show?
Take a micro.
I'm having.
What documents do you have to prove that it was really the Germans that were behind all the initiatives of the killing?
Repeat the question.
Yes. The question was, which documents do I have to claim that it was the Germans and not the Lithuanians, right?
Because we were always told that we have the Semitic Lithuanians or the others in other countries.
Yes.
They collaborated without any force.
Yes. And that's why I tried to, but this, when we had this little short discussion, there's a difference between memory and history. And memory tells us, yes, it was Lithuanians. When you read the testament from and I fully understand it, when you read the testament from Yochanan Elkes, from October 43, the chairman of the Kaunas ghetto, when he believed we are going to die very soon because the SS was taking over, that the Germans were killing in cold blood. Okay, to be expected. But what haunts us is the Lithuanians. They betrayed us. Yeah. So this is listen. So this but of course, behind all the killings in Kaunas were the Germans, not the Lithuanians. And the Germans were just as brutal as the Lithuanians. When you listen to all the Jewish maids, cleaning women, kitchen personnel, from the German Gestapo, from the German security police. What are they saying? They were coming back with bloody bloody coats. Yeah, and their shoes were steep. They were the German ones, not just the Lithuanian ones. So there is a certain. Now I'm risking something. I would even say there's a certain colonial view here. Eastern Europeans are somewhat less civilized than Germans. So we assume, yeah, Eastern European bitches. Yeah, we assume that Eastern Europeans are by nature more brutal than we Prussians. We write lists like the Jäger report, which is so inaccurate in many respects, and changed and everything. Yeah. So we have meaning. Now we try to find all the documents to especially actually to prove that it's your fault, not ours. And we don't find them. We don't find them. So when you look into the archives, all range of documents, any document actually, yeah. And what you have testimonies from after the war. From after the war, which repeat basically what Elkes was writing in October 43 in his testament already, in his letter to his 2 children, which is kind of objective. It's the same narrative, and I understand it, but it's not historic in history in the sense that this Lithuanian county chief wanted to murder Jews and then went to the Germans and asked for allowance or did it on himself. You don't find that. And you have no plans to kill parts of the German community before the Germans were in. No plans.
Jewish.
What did I say? Of course it was. Sorry. Yeah. So So when you look at the study, which is like the second half is completely on this, like 800 pages. Yeah. So I try to look at a lot of documents. If you find more, I will immediately change my opinion. Immediately. But I don't think there are.
There are documents in the...
We discuss later. Now soldiers, please. אפשר בעברית, אני מבין. תדברו לאט.
הנה, יש חייל.
מה הסיפור שם?
בוא.
תבוא לפה.
First of all, what I want to say is I kind of disagree with you. I have read before testimonies by Jewish Croats and Ukrainians who suffered much more brutal persecutions than, let's say, the Lithuanians or Germans. And the second thing is, I think there is also a distinct connection to primal Russian Soviet anti-Semitism and, at that age, modern anti-Semitism, such as protocols of Elders of Zion. I think that there is a distinction, a connection between them. What is your opinion?
When you look more extensively in the testimony, thanks for the question. When you look in the testimonies, be it written, be it video testimonies, all over Europe, mainly, let's stick to Eastern Europe. You find, when you look at Poland, the Poles were worse than the Germans. If you look at Lithuania, Lithuanians worse than the Germans. Latvian worse than the Germans. Ukrainians worse than the Germans, right? Now, Belarus, part of them worse than the Germans. Romania, oh, don't talk about them. Yeah, worse than the Germans. So there's a pattern here. There's a pattern here. Yeah, and that is depends on two things, I believe. One, the Germans were not so much present as the non-Germans were because of this scarcity of personnel. Yeah, in the ghettos they would hardly see Germans very often. Mura in Vilna, I only enter the ghetto if I want to. I have no functions there. I only enter and then I spread terror. But basically, everything was made between Lithuanian institutions, corporations, and the Jewish Council. No Germans involved, right? No Germans involved. So you don't deal with Germans. You see them somewhere, but you don't deal with them. So brutality. I don't accept that a Lithuanian is by nature more brutal than a German. I know my Germans well. I don't think so. Yeah, and the same is true for Ukrainians, Belarusians, so meaning, if you read it, but don't take it for real history. Take it at first time for memory, and then start your source work. How to interpret sources, combine it with other things. Go to what do we have before, not after the war, but before the war. What do we know? Is it confirmed or not confirmed? All the things, all the historical tools, exactly. Do that. And then you might confirm what you've read, or you might say, okay, maybe it's more a narrative than reality. Yeah? So Jewish Bolshevism, Russian, Southern, of course, protocols of work were, we can blame the Russians. Actually, it was the Ukrainians. I'm kidding. It was the Ukrainians, actually, as we know now. The story with the Russian fabrication of the protocols is not true. It was Ukrainians in 1904, and then republished in 1920, and then brought via Rosenberg, via Riga, to Hitler in Munich. And then it spread after the First World War. But not because they were so brilliant, but because the situation was such that this change was unexplainable without the Jews behind it. Yeah? German defeat, revolution, democracy, a nightmare. Okay?
Can I just have
microphone?
Sorry, only one question.
Only one question. We can talk after. I'm around.
After the soldier, please.
After the soldiers, you can stay.
After the soldier, please. קודם חיילים, בוא נשאל, כן. יש מישהו שרוצה להגיד? כן, אבל עכשיו, נכון לעכשיו. מישהו רוצה לשאול עוד משהו? אדם, אוקיי.
I wanted to ask.
קח את המיקרופון. לא, זה אין. לא למשוך.
I must agree with you that, of course, that it was German blame on the Holocaust, and Germany was responsible for all those atrocities made throughout the Holocaust. But I wanted to ask you, if you compare the Holocaust, from Lithuania or Ukraine or, for example, to the Holocaust that made in France, because the Jews, the numbers in France are much lower for the Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust, for example. So, is it just because of the collaboration, or is it just because the Nazis actually wanted, for example, to destroy the
the Eastern European Jews first and afterwards the Western Europeans? Or is it because, the France didn't have an idea with Jews inside it? What is the main, really, the difference between the France example to the Lithuanian or Ukraine example?
Thanks a lot for the question. Yes. We have to look at this European-wide. European-wide. Meaning we have to, you can gather details in each region, but then you have to widen the picture. Somebody mentioned Bulgaria, where I was saving Jews, but not in the annexed territories. In the annexed territories, which I took them from Greece, all Jews were murdered. 15,000. Macedonia, exactly. And Thracia. So all the Jews who had Bulgarian citizenship at first, they were saved. By some, they were saved. And in the annexed territories were murdered. France. There's a very interesting discussion, and I would say we don't know the answers yet, comparison between not France and Lithuania, but France and Netherlands and Belgium. Because sort of three civilized Western countries with very different murder rates of Jews. In France, 75% survived. 75% survived. 70,000 were murdered and 75% survived. Holland, I think was about 70% were murdered. Tolerant Holland. And in Belgium, most of the refugees, about half. How do you explain the difference? My approach, that's what I tried to make the basics at the beginning, link the questions not to ethnic characteristics or to grades of anti-Semitism, but link it to the warfare, to German interest in the war and German interest in the occupation policy. And then look at the relation between the people among themselves. So in France, for example, we know until November 42, only northern France was occupied, southern France was under a Vichy regime. All the police forces from the Germans in northern France and were taken from Vichy. In July 42, when the French Jews were deported from Paris, only French policemen were there doing that, deporting them knowing they go to Auschwitz from Drancy. Only French policemen, only, exclusively. Same they wouldn't need to shoot them, but they would be responsible for getting them away to the death camps. In the south of France, you have whole villages saving hundreds and hundreds of orphans, of Jewish children. Whole villages, whole valleys. You don't find that in Lithuania. But why? Because the German network was, of course, much, much looser in France than there. So what I'm saying is, all these questions are very, very good. My answer would be a methodological one. What would you do to try and identify plausible answers to this? Getting beyond the cliches, getting beyond the prejudices. And do historical work. Seriously. Carol, you know what I'm talking about, right? So, and then we get further. So we need to get beyond the fairy tales we know. Or we assume them, we assume with explanations. Okay? So it's actually, let's go and learn and it's the same thing I'm saying in Lithuania, the same thing I'm saying with Ukrainians as well, which have a nightmare history. 1.5 million Ukrainian Jews killed. Boris knows very well. So how do you deal with that? 1.5 million in one country. Okay? That as a beginning of an answer, which way should we go?
Okay, some soldiers. You want to ask him? Yes, please.
Hi. My question is, can you hear me? Yes. My question is, how is the Holocaust perceived in Germany? Because you keep saying the blame is on us, the Germans, and I was wondering if maybe your beliefs are sort of maybe extreme in Germany. Maybe some people are, the Lithuanians are also to blame. And also, another question, do you teach the Holocaust at school or something as we do in Israel? Thank you.
You know who was first victim of Hitler? The Germans, of course. The second one, the Austrians. And then all the rest of Europe. The narrative after World War, after 45, everybody was victimizing himself. Everybody. We Germans were sitting there in Nuremberg. Allies come in, make a process, military tribunals. Oh, we hope they will sentence them harshly because they brainwashed, they seduced us. So externalizing responsibility is key business all over Europe. All over. Yeah? Now the difference is, of course, Germany was occupied. We were losers. Yeah? And then it took basically 80 years. 80 years. I'm not one of those who would say we Germans are world champions in dealing with the past. No way. 2 years ago, they made a survey with thousands of family stories, on resistance against the Nazis. Now, historically, less than 1% was somehow active in Germany, inside the German population, 60 million people. Less than 1% was somehow active, connected to any kind of resistance, active resistance, not even armed, any kind of resistance, hiding Jews, hiding communists, hiding prisoners of war, whatever. Less than 1%. In this survey, 30% of the family members, 30, PLF. Of course our family was involved in resistance. So, how many people, we know 8,000 people were active in Auschwitz, in this huge camp complex. Yeah? Soldiers, guards. How many of them were sentenced by Germans? 14. Yeah? That's it. So I could get very cynical about this. Yeah? The only way out of this is democratic education. And I'm not teaching in Germany at the moment, I'm teaching in Haifa. Yeah, so it's actually a European-Israeli project all the time. Yeah, and Holocaust education, yes. Many people say it's far too much, but it starts like it's too much about the narrative is repetitive. It starts and you just go off. You know what's coming next for 15 minutes, and if it's over, then you start to think again as a listener. Yeah, we don't make it interesting. Now I had most of you listening most of the time, I believe. Yeah, but why? Because it's a little bit different what I'm trying to do. Yeah, but many often we have ritualized narratives which are just boring. Yeah, and so we have to work constantly on that. And democracy is key. Democracy is key for this, more important than anything else. Yeah, and human rights, of course. And so the answer to the Holocaust is Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. That's it. That's the way to go.
Okay, thank you. Some questions? Okay, I understand we must leave 12:15. Okay, thank you very much.
So we'll wait for the soldiers to leave.
Yes.
Thank you for coming. And we will... We haven't finished. Only the soldiers are leaving.
No.
חברים, עוד 2 דקות בבקשה, עוד 2 דקות. אני מזכירה לכם שאנחנו היום... לא, סליחה. חכה רגע, בוריס, שב רגע. אנחנו מציינים היום את יום הזיכרון הבינלאומי, וסליחה. ואנחנו רוצים לעשות תמונה, כמו בכל מקום. אם קיבלתם שלטים, עם We Remember, עם הלוגו של איגוד יוצאי וילנה, אז אנחנו מתבקשים להרים אותו. מי שצריך להסתיר חלקים מהסמלים שיעשה את זה, ואנחנו נעשה צילום קבוצתי גדול עם השלט הזה ברור. מי מצלם?
Ja.
כן? וזה יבוא
וזה יבוא עם שירת התקווה. אנחנו לא עוזבים לשירת התקווה. אז בואו נתחיל. מגינה, יש לך קול? קולות ברבע בנימה אפס יהודי הומיה ופתי מזרח קדימה עין לציון צופיה עוד לא עבדה תקוותנו התקווה בשנות 2000 להיות החופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים להיות החופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים. אז עכשיו זה הזמן להגיד תודה רבה לכולם. תודה רבה לשגר הקליטה, תודה רבה לאלנה שהגיעה, וכריסטוף, אפשר להמשיך להתווכח, אני רוצה, בהחלט, נכון, אבל אני רוצה למסור לך מתנה קטנה, בסוף? אז, אוקיי. אז תודה רבה לנציגי חיל הים שהיו, וכל מי שרוצה יכול להישאר. כריסטוף נשאר איתנו.